Lorraine Warren hangs suspended in midair, her body contorted at impossible angles. Blood trickles from her eyes as she screams, her voice echoing with unnatural reverberations. Ed, it's not the house, it's the keys. The keys are doorways. The grandfather clock in the corner of the room spins wildly, its hands rotating so fast they blur. Hours pass in seconds. Days compress into moments. Decades flash by in the blink of an eye. Ed Warren lunges toward his wife, desperation etched. On his face, Lorraine, stay with me. Between them float dozens of antique keys, ornate and ancient, spinning in violent circles. When Ed reaches out, they slash at his skin like razor blades, cutting deep furrows that bleed black instead of red. Time is running out, Lorraine gasps, her voice shifting between her own and something older, something that speaks with many voices at once. They're coming through. The wallpaper around them peels away in strips, revealing glimpses of somewhere else behind it. Not empty wall or wooden beams, but other places. A scorched landscape where figures writhe in agony. A forest of twisted trees with human faces embedded in the bark. A vast sea where massive tentacled forms breach the surface, their flesh composed of screaming human bodies fused together. She's the key, Ed. Lorraine's body begins to transform, her mouth stretching wider than humanly possible, the corners extending toward her ears until her lips form a perfect keyhole shape. Hannah doesn't know what she is. Something reaches through Lorenz. Distorted mouth from the other side, skeletal fingers with too many joints grasping at the air. The clock chimes 13 times, though its face only shows 12 numbers. Ed grabs a crucifix from his pocket, holding it toward his wife as tears stream down his face. Fight it, Lorraine. Stay in our time. The keys suddenly freeze in midair, then converge on Lorraine all at once, embedding themselves into her flesh with wet, sickening sounds. Her skin bulges and ripples as they move beneath it like parasites. Find the master key before he forges it, she gasps, her voice suddenly clear and her own again, eyes lucid with terror. If Ambrose completes it with Hannah's essence, all the doorways will open at once. All of them, Ed. The windows implode, showering the room with glass that hangs suspended instead of falling. Each shard reflects a different nightmare realm, each one hungrier than the last. Vincent tried to warn us, Lorraine whispers as her body begins to dissolve into metallic particles, her form becoming key-shaped. Time isn't linear at the plantation. What happens there has already happened, is happening, will happen again. The room around them shifts and distorts, walls bending at impossible angles. A door forms in the center of the room where none existed before, its frame oozing a thick black substance that smells of copper and rot. Ed, Lorraine says, her voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere, when you find me again, I won't remember any of this. You have to make me remember. Just as the door begins to open on its own, revealing a swirling vortex of screaming faces behind it, Ed reaches his wife. Their fingers almost touch, almost, the keys surrounding Lorraine spin faster, forming a metallic cocoon around her body. Her final scream hangs in the air like a physical thing as the door slams shut with such force that reality itself seems to splinter. Then silence, complete silence. The clock stops. Ed Warren stands alone in an ordinary hotel room, his equipment packed neatly in cases, no sign of destruction or otherworldly intrusion. No floating keys, no dimensional doorways, no Lorraine. His phone rings, displaying a name, Hannah Winters. Mr. Warren, a young woman's voice asks when he answers. "My name is Hannah. I need your help. I've taken a job at Devereaux Plantation, and I think something's wrong with time here. The previous nurse disappeared, and I found a journal with your name in it." Ed looks at his watch. The second hand ticks normally, then stops, then moves backward for 3 seconds before resuming its forward motion. "I'll be there tomorrow," he says, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. "Whatever you do, stay away from Vincent's key collection. Don't touch them. Don't even look at them. And if you notice any doors that weren't there before, don't open them, not for anything." "How did you know about the keys?" Hannah asks, confusion evident in her voice. Ed doesn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the wedding ring on his finger that now appears tarnished and ancient, though it was polished gold moments ago, because, he finally says, this has all happened before. Hannah Winters gripped the steering wheel tighter as her car rumbled down the overgrown driveway toward Devereaux Plantation. Thick Louisiana humidity pressed against the windows like a living thing, fogging the glass despite the air conditioning, working at full blast. The plantation house emerged from between massive oak trees draped with Spanish moss. 3 stories of white columns and wraparound porches, its grandeur faded but still impressive against the darkening sky. Hannah checked her watch. 4:30 in the afternoon, though the shadows stretched as if it were much later. She had taken this job out of desperation. 6 months since the hospital let her go after that patient died on her watch. 6 months of unanswered applications and dwindling savings. When the agency called with a private nursing position paying triple the standard rate, she had accepted immediately. Now, seeing the isolation of this place, she understood the premium. Hannah parked beside a weathered pickup truck and gathered her bags. The moment she stepped from the car, the air felt wrong, heavier, as if gravity pulled slightly stronger. Here, she shivered despite the heat. The front door opened before she reached it. Miss Winters, a tall, thin man with remarkably smooth skin, greeted her with a smile that never reached his pale eyes. Right on time. "I'm Elijah, the caretaker." Hannah followed him into a grand foyer where a grandfather clock dominated the entrance. Its face showed 3:15, though Hannah's watch still read for 30. "Clock's been stubborn for years," Elijah said, noticing her gaze. "Mr. Devereaux prefers we don't adjust it." Hannah nodded, distracted by the sensation of being watched. From the second-floor landing, when she looked up, she saw only empty space. "Your room is prepared upstairs. Mr. Devereaux is resting now. You'll meet him in the morning." Elijah took one of her bags. The house has certain peculiarities. Old homes always do. As they climbed the stairs, Hannah noticed framed photographs lining the wall. Black and white images of the plantation through different eras. In one from what appeared to be the 1920s, she noticed a figure who looked remarkably like Elijah standing on the porch. "Is that a relative of yours?" she asked. Elijah barely glanced at the photo. "My family has served the Devereaux for generations. We all bear a strong resemblance. Tends to confuse visitors." Her room was spacious but oppressive, filled with antique furniture that seemed to absorb light. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, its dark wood elaborately carved with symbols Hannah didn't recognize. The walls were covered in faded floral wallpaper, peeling slightly in the corners to reveal older patterns beneath. "Bathroom through there," Elijah pointed. "Kitchen is downstairs. Help yourself to anything." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One important rule. The East Wing is Mr. Devereaux's private area. His study contains a collection of antique keys. They're extremely valuable. Please don't enter that wing without me. After Elijah left, Hannah began unpacking. She placed her clothes in a heavy oaked dresser, then froze when she noticed writing scratched into the bottom of one drawer. Days pass differently here. I've been here 3 years, but outside, it's only been weeks. Hannah ran her fingers over the desperate scrawl. Probably some bored teenager who had stayed here years ago. She finished unpacking quickly, eager to explore. Before dark, the hallways of Devereaux Plantation seemed to extend farther than the exterior of the house suggested possible. Hannah counted doors, trying to create a mental map. 12 doors on the second floor, though from outside she had counted only 8. Windows, architectural quirk, she reasoned. She descended to the first floor and found herself in a sitting room she hadn't passed through earlier. Disoriented, she turned around to find the doorway she had entered now opened into a different hallway entirely. "Houses this old are mazes," came a voice behind her. Hannah turned to find an elderly black woman in a housekeeper's uniform arranging flowers in a vase. "I'm Hannah Winters, the new nurse. Pleased to meet you. I'm Cordelia. Been with the house 40 years. The woman didn't look up from her flowers. "You'll want to keep a close eye on your watch here. Time has a way of slipping." The caretaker mentioned something about the clocks. "Not the clocks, child. Time itself." Cordelia finally looked up, her eyes cloudy with cataracts that somehow still seemed to see too much. "You have nightmares about hallways, don't you?" Hannah took an involuntary step back. "How could you know that?" "Because the house already knows you. It's been waiting." Before Hannah could respond, a crash echoed. From somewhere above them, Cordelia resumed arranging flowers as if nothing had happened. "You should check on Mr. Devereaux, East Wing, end of the hall." But Elijah said not to go there without him. Cordelia's hands stilled. Sometimes rules exist to protect you. Sometimes they exist to protect secrets. Hannah found herself climbing the stairs again, drawn toward the east wing despite Elijah's warning. The hallway grew noticeably colder as she approached a set of double doors at its end. She hesitated, then pushed them open. Vincent Devereaux's study was lined floor to ceiling, with glass display cases containing hundreds of keys. Ornate skeleton keys, modern car keys, ancient iron monstrosities that looked too heavy to lift, each labeled meticulously with dates and locations. 1791 Marseille, 1842 London, 1903 New Orleans. In a bed by the window lay an emaciated old man, his eyes open but vacant, staring at the ceiling. His fingers worked constantly, turning an invisible key in an invisible lock. "Mr. Devereaux, I'm Hannah, your new nurse." The old man's head snapped toward her with unnatural speed, his eyes suddenly alert and terrified. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Not again." Hannah froze. "I don't understand. This is my first day." Vincent's hand shot out, bony fingers clutching a small leather journal. He pressed it into her hands with surprising strength. "Find Warren before it's too late. It's already happening again." Hannah opened the journal to find newspaper clippings about paranormal investigators named Ed and Lorraine Warren. Pages of notes in Vincent's handwriting mentioned doorways, dimensions, and a master key. "What does this mean?" she asked. But Vincent had slipped back into his catatonic state, fingers turning that invisible key. Behind her, Hannah heard a faint, metallic scraping, the sound of hundreds of keys turning in their display cases, all at once. In her pocket, her phone began ringing. The caller ID showed a name she had never seen before. Ed Warren. Hannah stared at her phone in disbelief. Ed Warren, the same name from Vincent's journal, was now calling her. Before she could answer, Elijah appeared in the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the room. "I see you've met Mr. Devereaux," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "And I see he's given you his journal of delusions." The phone stopped ringing. "He wanted me to have this," Hannah said, clutching the journal tighter. "He seems to think something is happening again." Elijah stepped into the room, his movements unnaturally fluid. "Vincent has dementia. He confuses past and present. Sometimes he believes he's living the same days over and over." He extended his hand. "The journal, please. It upsets him when people humor his fantasies." Hannah reluctantly handed it over, noting how Elijah's fingers seemed too long, the joints bending at odd angles as they closed around the leather cover. "You should rest," Elijah said. "First day in a new place is always disorienting." That night, Hannah dreamed of endless hallways that shifted and changed each time she turned a corner. Doors that opened to reveal other doors. In the dream, she heard Vincent's voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "They'll use your fear too. Open the door." She woke with a gasp at 3:15, the numbers glowing on her bedside clock. When she reached to turn on the lamp, her hand brushed against something cold and metallic on her pillow. An antique key, its shaft twisted into an elaborate spiral pattern. Hannah was certain it hadn't been there when she went to sleep. A low, whispering sound drew her attention to the door of her room. Shadows moved in the gap beneath it, flowing against the direction of the hallway light. Hannah slid out of bed, the key clutched in her trembling hand, and approached the door. The moment her fingers touched the knob, the whispering stopped. She opened the door to find the hallway empty, though the air felt charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. Hannah made her way downstairs, drawn to the soft glow emanating from Vincent's study. She found him awake, sitting upright in his bed, more lucid than before. The key display cases around the room were all open, their contents missing. "You found one," Vincent said, nodding at the key in her hand. "They're calling to you." "Where did this come from?" Hannah asked. "It was on my pillow. The house gives what's needed." Vincent's voice was stronger now. "Time is thin here, worn down by too many passages. I don't understand. The Devereaux family discovered something generations ago. Doorways exist between worlds, between times. Ordinary keys can become extraordinary in the right hands." Vincent gestured weakly at the empty cases. "My ancestor Ambrose became obsessed with creating a master key that could open any door, anywhere, anywhere, anywhen. He needed special materials, special essence." A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Vincent's eyes widened with fear. "Take this," he whispered, pressing an ornate brass key into her hand alongside the one she already held. "It opens the truth." The door burst open. Elijah stood there, his face a mask of fury. Behind him, Hannah could see the hallway stretching impossibly long, doors multiplying along its length. "What lies have you been telling her, old man?" Elijah demanded. "No lies," Vincent replied, suddenly calm. "Just memory. This has all happened before." Elijah lunged forward with inhuman speed. Hannah stumbled back as Vincent raised his hand. Clutched in his bony fingers was a third key, this one made of what looked like bone. "Not this time," Vincent said, turning the key in the air as if unlocking an invisible door. The room temperature plummeted. Objects around them began to levitate: paperweights, books, even Vincent's bed rising several inches off the floor. In the mirror above the fireplace, Hannah saw a shadow figure standing behind her, though she felt nothing when she spun around. Vincent suddenly grabbed her wrist, his grip burning cold. Hannah cried out as his touch left a small mark on her skin in the shape of a keyhole. "They'll use your fear to open the door," he rasped, eyes rolling back. "Find Warren. He knows because it's already happened for him." Elijah grabbed Hannah, pulling her away. "Enough of this. He needs his medication." That night, Hannah slept fitfully, the 2 keys hidden under her mattress. She woke to find her bedroom door locked from the outside. Panic rose in her chest as she rattled the knob fruitlessly. "Hello, is anyone there?" No answer came. The digital clock by her bed read 8:07 a.m. Hannah banged on the door, calling for help, but the house remained silent. After an hour of attempting to force the door open, she slumped to the floor in defeat. When she looked at her clock again, it read 7:32 a.m., earlier than before. She checked her watch to find it showing 3:15 p.m. outside her window. The sun rose and set in rapid succession, daylight and darkness alternating every few minutes. Hannah pressed herself against the wall, heart racing. This couldn't be happening. She was hallucinating, having some kind of breakdown. The room grew colder with each nightfall that flashed by her window, frost forming on the glass during the brief moments of darkness, melting during the seconds of daylight. She lost track of how long she remained trapped. Her watch hands spun wildly, sometimes forward, sometimes backward. The digital clock cycled through numbers that made no sense: 25 to 61, 13 to 99. Outside, stars streaked across the sky like time-lapse photography. When Hannah examined the door more closely, she found dozens of scratch marks on the wood, some fresh, others aged and worn. Messages carved by desperate hands. "Let me out, been here for years' time," wrong with trembling hands. She retrieved the 2 keys from under her mattress. The brass one seemed to pulse with warmth. Following an instinct she couldn't explain, she inserted it into the keyhole. The door swung open to reveal not the hallway, but a small room containing a rotting corpse in a nurse's uniform. The body sat propped against the wall, its mouth stretched into an impossibly wide shape, like a keyhole. In its hand was a journal identical to Vincent's. Hannah stumbled backward with a scream. When she looked again, the horrific scene was gone, replaced by the normal hallway. On shaking legs, she made her way downstairs, her hair now several inches longer than it had been when she entered the room. Cordelia stood at the bottom of the stairs, unsurprised by Hannah's appearance. "You were only in there for 3 hours," she said. "Less time than the others." "What's happening here?" Hannah demanded. "Time sickness," Cordelia replied. "This house sits on a weak point, between worlds, between times. Mr. Devereaux has been fighting it for decades." Hannah pulled out her phone to call for help, but the screen displayed only swirling patterns. She tried Elijah's number from the paperwork the agency had provided. "Police department," answered a confused voice. "I need help," Hannah said. "I'm at Devereaux Plantation and something is wrong with time here. There was a body, but it disappeared." "Ma'am, Devereaux Plantation burned down in 1891. There's nothing there but ruins." Hannah stood in the very solid, very real foyer of the mansion, staring at Cordelia, who simply nodded as if this confirmed something. "Call him," Cordelia said. "The one Vincent told you about, Warren, before Elijah returns." Hannah ended the call and scrolled through her recent calls. Ed Warren was still listed there, though she hadn't answered. With trembling fingers, she pressed the number and waited. Hannah answered a man's voice without preamble. "It's happening again, isn't it?" "How do you know my name?" Hannah asked, gripping the phone tightly. "Because we've spoken before," Ed Warren replied, his voice grave. "Though for you, it hasn't happened yet. Listen carefully. Find somewhere. Private Elijah can't know we're talking." Hannah slipped into a small parlor off the main hallway, closing the door behind her. The room contained a single chair and a dusty piano, its yellowed keys depressed in places as if phantom fingers were playing silent melodies. "I found Vincent's journal," she whispered into the phone. "There were newspaper clippings about you and your wife, and something about keys. Vincent reached out to me 6 months ago," Ed explained. "Said his family had discovered doorways between dimensions, between points in time, doorways that could be unlocked with special keys. He was afraid something was trying to create a master key that could open all doorways at once." "That's impossible," Hannah said, though the evidence of impossibility surrounded her. "My wife and I investigate the impossible, Ms. Winters. We're paranormal researchers." A pause. "Lorraine and I will be there tomorrow morning. Until then, stay away from Elijah, and whatever you do, don't touch any more keys." Hannah glanced down at her wrist where the keyhole mark from Vincent's touch still burned. It might be too late for that. The line went dead. When Hannah tried to call back, the phone displayed the current date as January 18th, 1964. That night, Hannah barricaded herself in her room, pushing the heavy dresser against the door. She placed the 2 keys Vincent had given her under her pillow and tried to stay awake, but exhaustion eventually pulled her into uneasy sleep. She dreamed of being trapped in endless hallways again, but this time she saw other people trapped with her. Previous nurses, housekeepers, visitors, all wandering the corridors that shifted and changed. In the dream, Elijah moved among them, collecting something luminous from each person that he stored in antique pocket watches. Hannah woke to knocking at her door. Sunlight streamed through her window, though her clock read 3:15 a.m. "Ms. Winters," called a woman's voice. "Hannah." "It's Lorraine Warren. Ed is with me." Hannah cautiously moved the dresser and opened the door to find a couple in their 50s. The man was solidly built with concerned eyes, carrying a large equipment case. The woman was slender with an intensity to her gaze that seemed to look through Hannah rather than at her. "Thank God," Hannah breathed. "I was beginning to think I was losing my mind." "You're not," Lorraine assured her, though she swayed slightly as she stepped into the room. Ed steadied his wife with a practiced hand. "The house recognizes you," Lorraine murmured, her eyes unfocused. "It's been waiting." Ed set down his case and opened it, revealing an array of equipment: cameras, audio recorders, religious items, and scientific instruments. "Vincent contacted us about temporal anomalies centered around his family's key collection," Ed explained. "As he set up, we were preparing to investigate when I had a vivid dream of Lorraine in danger. In the dream, you called us for help, but I never called you," Hannah said. "Your number appeared on my phone." "Time doesn't flow normally here," Lorraine said, her voice distant. "Cause and effect are untethered. I can feel it already, so many layers of reality pressing against each other." Ed took Hannah's hand, examining the keyhole mark on her wrist. "Vincent did this," Hannah nodded. "He said they would use my fear to open the door." "I don't know what that means." "It means you're important," Lorraine said, suddenly focusing intently on Hannah. "The house chose you. brought you here?" A grandfather clock somewhere in the house began to chime, though it wasn't any hour. The chimes continued far beyond 12, reverberating through the walls. "We should speak with Vincent," Ed said, "before Elijah returns." They made their way to the east wing, the hallway seeming to extend and contract as they walked. Doors they passed appeared in different positions. When they looked back, "The architecture isn't stable," Ed observed, running a hand along the wall. "The physical space is responding to temporal instabilities." Vincent's study was empty, the bed showing signs of a struggle. The display cases for the keys stood open and bare. "He's moved him," Lorraine said, her fingers brushing the rumpled bedsheets. A series of rapid visions flashed through her mind, Vincent being dragged down a hidden staircase. A room filled with pocket watches, all displaying different times. Elijah, standing before an altar of human bones, shaped like a massive key. The vision was so powerful that Lorraine collapsed, her body convulsing. Ed rushed to her side, cradling her head. "Lorraine, come back to me, honey." Hannah watched in horror as Lorraine's eyes rolled back, her body contorting unnaturally. When she spoke, her voice was not her own. "The Keeper of Keys knows you're here." "Edward Warren," said the voice, ancient and mocking. "This has all happened before. Will happen again. Time is a circle in this house." Ed pulled a crucifix from his pocket, pressing it to Lorraine's forehead. "Whoever you are, leave my wife." Lorraine gasped, her body relaxing as she returned to herself. "Ed," she whispered, "I saw hundreds of doorways, hundreds of worlds. He's been collecting pieces of time from people for centuries, using them to power the keys." As they helped Lorraine to her feet, the room temperature plummeted. The mirror above the fireplace clouded, then cleared to show not their reflections but Elijah standing in a basement room. Vincent strapped to a table before him. "I know you can see me, Warrens," Elijah said, looking directly at them through the mirror. "You're never on time, always too early or too late. That's the problem with linear thinking." He held up an ornate key. Vincent hid pieces of the master key throughout the house. "Throughout time, he thought that would stop me." Elijah laughed, the sound echoing strangely. "But I have all the time in the world." In the mirror, they watched helplessly as Elijah pressed the key against Vincent's chest. The old man screamed. As the metal melded with his flesh, his body beginning to transform. "Now I have another piece," Elijah said. "The Devereaux bloodline is strong with temporal energy, almost as strong as the Warren line." The mirror suddenly shattered, shards hanging suspended in the air for a moment before falling. Ed turned to Hannah, his face grim. "We need to find the pieces of the master key before Elijah does. And we need to understand why you're connected to all this. How are we supposed to find hidden keys in a house where time and space don't make sense?" Hannah asked. Lorraine reached into her pocket and removed a small pendulum. "We follow the currents of time. They'll flow toward the keys." She looked at Hannah with concern. "And we need to determine why the house marked you. Why it's been waiting for you specifically." Hannah twisted the keyhole mark on her wrist. "What happens if Elijah gets all the pieces? Then every doorway between worlds opens at once," Ed said. "And what's on the other side comes through." Outside the room, throughout the house, they heard the sound of hundreds of locks turning simultaneously. Ed moved quickly, setting up equipment around Vincent's study. He placed small digital recorders in each corner, while Lorraine drew protective symbols in blessed chalk around the doorways. "We need to establish a baseline," Ed explained to Hannah. "In places with temporal disturbances, electronic equipment can sometimes capture anomalies that exist outside our normal perception of time. Hannah watched as he set up a camera on a tripod. "Have you seen anything like this before?" "Never this severe," Ed admitted. "We've investigated time slips, moments where past and present bleed together. But this house exists in multiple time streams simultaneously." Lorraine finished her protective markings and joined them. "We need to find Cordelia. She knows more than she's telling." They found a housekeeper in the kitchen, calmly preparing tea as if nothing unusual was happening. When she saw them, she nodded as if she'd been expecting them. "Sit," she instructed, placing 4 cups on the table. "You have questions." "You knew we were coming," Lorraine said. "I've seen you come and go many times," Cordelia replied. "Sometimes you save the girl, sometimes you don't. Time repeats here, but with variations." Hannah leaned forward. "What am I to all this? Why? Did Vincent give me those keys?" Cordelia's eyes narrowed. "Show me your wrist." Hannah extended her arm, revealing the keyhole mark. Cordelia sucked in a breath. "The mark is deeper than before. It's claiming you faster this time." "This time?" Ed asked. "Hannah has been here before. Will be here again. The Devereaux family discovered something terrible centuries ago. A place between places. They learned to forge keys that could open doorways to other times, other worlds." Cordelia sipped her tea. "Ambrose Devereaux became obsessed with creating a master key that could control all doorways at once." "Elijah is Ambrose, isn't he?" Lorraine asked quietly. Cordelia nodded. "He found a way to extend his life by stealing time from others. Each victim provides a piece of temporal energy he stores in those pocket watches he carries. But the master key requires a special component, a living key." All eyes turned to Hannah, who felt suddenly cold. "Why me?" she whispered. "Your bloodline," Cordelia said simply. "You're a direct descendant of Ambrose Devereaux through his daughter who escaped this house. You carry the same temporal resonance. The house recognized your blood the moment you arrived." Hannah shook her head in disbelief. "That's impossible. I'm from Boston. My family has no connection to Louisiana." "Bloodlines scatter," Cordelia said, "but time pulls them back together. Elijah has been searching for a descendant with the right temporal signature for centuries. When you applied for this job, it wasn't coincidence." Ed's recorder suddenly emitted a burst of static, followed by a voice none of them recognized. "The binding ritual begins at the 13th hour." Lorraine stood abruptly. "We need to see the whole house, right now." They followed Cordelia through the mansion's winding hallways. Doors they hadn't noticed before appeared as they passed. Rooms seemed to shift positions. "The house is fluid," Cordelia explained. "Some rooms exist in different times. Step through the wrong door, you might find yourself decades away." She led them to a small door beneath the main staircase. Vincent hid some of the master key components in rooms anchored to specific time periods. "This one leads to 1891. Lorraine reached for the handle, then jerked her hand back with a gasp. The others watched in horror as her hand rapidly aged, then reverted to normal, the process taking only seconds. "Time is rushing past this door," she said. "It's not stable." Ed pulled a small vial of holy water from his bag, sprinkling it on. The threshold. The wood sizzled where the drops landed. "Consecrated objects can sometimes stabilize temporal thresholds," he explained. "It creates a sort of anchor point in our reality." When the sizzling stopped, Lorraine cautiously touched the door again. This time, nothing happened. She nodded to Ed, who opened it slowly. Beyond lay not a room, but a sprawling garden in full bloom, sunlight streaming down though it had been evening moments before. In the center of the garden stood a gazebo where a young woman in Victorian dress sat weeping, an ornate key clutched in her hands. "That's Emma Devereux," Cordelia whispered, "Ambrose's daughter, the one who tried to stop him." Lorraine stepped cautiously through the doorway, the others following. The air felt different, heavier and scented with unfamiliar flowers. The crying woman showed no awareness of their presence. "She can't see us," Lorraine explained. "We're witnessing an echo, a moment preserved in time." They watched as a younger version of Elijah approached the gazebo, his movements predatory. The woman looked up in terror. "I won't help you, Father," she said. "What you're doing is abomination." "The key must be completed," replied Elijah, his voice the same as in their time. "Your blood is necessary. I've hidden the components," Emma declared. "You'll never find them all." Elijah lunged for her, but Emma produced a small silver key from her sleeve. Before he could reach her, she inserted it into the air itself and turned. A doorway appeared, shimmering like heat haze, and she stepped through, vanishing. Elijah howled with rage, the sound echoing across the garden and distorting the very air around them. The scene began to fragment, colors bleeding together. "We need to go back," Ed warned. "This time stream is collapsing." They rushed back through the doorway into the house, slamming it shut behind them. The wood of the door aged rapidly, cracking and warping until it looked centuries old. "Emma escaped him," Hannah said, "and she was my ancestor." "Yes," Cordelia confirmed. "She fled through time itself, taking key components with her. Ambrose has been trying to reassemble them ever since." Lorraine suddenly clutched her head, dropping to her knees with a cry of pain. When Ed reached for her, she seized his wrist with unnatural strength, her eyes completely white. "It's happening," she gasped, her voice overlapping with another, deeper voice. "The binding begins. The keyhole is opening." Hannah felt a searing pain in her wrist. The keyhole mark was spreading up her arm, the skin around it turning metallic. "What's happening to me?" she cried. "Ambrose has Vincent," Cordelia said grimly. "He's using him to forge another component. That energy is calling to your mark." Lorraine collapsed completely, her body convulsing. Ed cradled her, panic in his eyes. "She's having a vision," he explained. "Sometimes they overwhelm her." When Lorraine's eyes opened again, they were her own, filled with terror. "I saw it," she whispered. "The master key, what it opens." She turned to Hannah, her face pale. "And I saw what you become if we fail." They moved Lorraine to the parlor, where she lay pale and trembling on a fainting couch. Ed hovered nearby, concern etched on his face. "What did you see?" he asked his wife gently. Lorraine closed her eyes, reliving the terrible vision. A door bigger than comprehension. Behind it, creatures that feed on time itself. They exist outside our reality. She looked at Hannah. "And I saw you, transformed into the final component of the key. Your body fused with metal, your consciousness trapped and aware for eternity." Hannah shuddered, the keyhole mark on her arm throbbing in response. "How do we stop it?" "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with," Ed said decisively. "Cordelia, does Vincent keep records?" "Family histories," the housekeeper nodded. "The Devereux family library. Hidden room behind the main study." Ed gathered his equipment while Hannah helped Lorraine to her feet. The older woman seemed to have aged years in minutes, her face lined with new wrinkles that faded even as they watched. time flowing strangely around her. The hidden library revealed itself when Cordelia pressed a sequence of carved roses on the study's walnut paneling. The bookcase swung inward, revealing a circular room lined with ancient volumes. In the center stood a pedestal supporting a massive, leather-bound tome, the Devereux family record, Cordelia explained. Begun in 1742 and maintained by each generation. Ed approached the book cautiously. "May I?" Cordelia nodded. "It's meant to be read. The truth wants to be known." The pages were brittle with age, filled with elegant handwriting that shifted between languages, sometimes mid-sentence. Ed turned carefully to the beginning, where a family tree sprawled across 2 pages. He traced the branches with his finger, stopping at a name near the bottom. "Hannah Winters," he read, looking up in shock. "Your name is here, dated 1891 to 1964. Hannah stared at the impossible entry. "That can't be right. I was born in 1990. Time is circular here," Lorraine murmured. "What will happen has already happened." Ed continued, turning pages, translating passages written in French and Latin. According to this, the Devereux family discovered a nexus point on this property in 1742, a place where the barriers between dimensions were naturally thin. He turned another page to reveal detailed technical drawings of various keys. They began experimenting with ways to access these other dimensions, eventually discovering that specially forged keys could open temporary doorways. Ambrose Devereux took the experiments further, Cordelia added. He believed if he could create a master key, he could control all doorways permanently. But the materials required were extraordinary, Ed read. Components forged from human consciousness, temporal energy harvested from specific bloodlines, metals exposed to 2-dimensional energies. Hannah peered over his shoulder at illustrations depicting human figures being transformed into key components. "This is monstrous." "It gets worse," Ed said grimly, turning to a section marked with a warning symbol. Ambrose discovered entities. On the other side, beings that existed outside normal space-time. They promised him immortality in exchange for access to our world. "The chronophages," Lorraine whispered. "Time eaters. I saw them in my vision." Ed nodded. According to this, they taught Ambrose how to extract temporal energy from living beings, extending his own life while providing the power needed for his keys. He turned to a page showing a familiar face. Emma Devereux, Ambrose's daughter, opposed her father's work. When she discovered the true nature of the entities he served, she sabotaged the master key components and fled through time. He looked up at Hannah. "She must be your ancestor." Hannah felt dizzy with the implications. "So I'm here because of something that happened over a century ago." "You're here because you were always meant to be here," Cordelia said. Emma scattered her descendants across time, hoping to break the cycle. But time has a way of pulling the pieces back together. Ed frowned at a particular passage. "It says here, Ambrose needs 3 things to complete the master key: the Devereux bloodline, a Warren's psychic energy, and the 13th hour. The 13th hour?" Hannah asked. "A moment between moments," Lorraine explained, "when time folds back on itself. In this house, it happens when all the clocks show 3:15 simultaneously." Ed checked his watch. "That's less than 6 hours from now." As he spoke, they heard a distant metallic scraping from the walls, the sound of hundreds of hidden keys turning. "In locks, Elijah knows we're getting close to the truth," Cordelia warned. "We should move to another room." They hurried from the library, following Cordelia down a narrow service corridor. Ed continued to leaf through the journal he had brought from the library. "Wait," he said suddenly. "There's something here about Vincent. It says he discovered a way to counteract the master key using temporal anchors." "What are temporal anchors?" Hannah asked. "Objects that exist in multiple time streams simultaneously," Lorraine explained. "They can stabilize reality around them." Ed read further. Vincent created 7 anchors and hid them throughout the house, each in a different time period. The pocket watches, Hannah realized. "I saw them in my dream." Elijah was collecting something from people and storing it in antique watches. "Not collecting," Cordelia corrected. "Returning. Each watch contains a fragment of stolen time. When united, they can reset the temporal distortions in this house." They emerged from the corridor into what appeared to be a dusty ballroom. Standing in its center was a glass case containing a partially assembled key, almost 2 feet long, its metal an impossible shade that seemed to shift as they looked at it. "One of Vincent's anchors," Cordelia explained, "hidden in plain sight." Ed approached cautiously. "It's not a component of the master key." "No," Cordelia said. "It's the opposite. A key designed to lock doorways rather than open them." Hannah felt the keyhole mark on her arm burning in proximity to the object. When she looked down, she saw the mark had grown, now extending halfway to her elbow, the skin around it taking on a metallic sheen. "We need to find the others," Lorraine said. "All 7 anchors." As she spoke, the ballroom began to change around them. Dust vanished, revealing polished floors. Ghostly figures in period dress appeared, dancing to music. They couldn't hear. "The room is shifting time streams," Ed warned. "We need to stay together." The phantom dancers solidified, becoming more real with each second. Among them, moving with predatory grace, was Elijah. He looked directly at them, smiling as he approached through the dancing couples. "You can't stop what's already happened," he said. "The key will be forged. The door will open." He glanced at Hannah. "And you, dear descendant, will fulfill your purpose." Hannah clutched her marked arm. "You're not my family. Emma escaped you, did she?" Elijah laughed. "Or did I let her go, knowing her bloodline would strengthen over generations, producing exactly what I needed?" He extended his hand, a perfect living key. Ed stepped between Hannah and Elijah, holding up a crucifix. "Stay back," Elijah smiled, unperturbed. "Religious symbols have no power here, Edward Warren. This house exists beyond your God's jurisdiction." The phantom dancers continued their silent waltz around them, occasionally passing through solid objects as if they weren't there. The music grew louder, becoming audible as a discordant melody that hurt their ears. "Take the anchor and go," Cordelia urged, moving toward the glass case. "I'll hold him here." Elijah's smile faded. "You've interfered for the last time, Cordelia." He reached into his coat and withdrew an ornate pocket watch. With a flick of his thumb, he opened it. The effect was immediate. Cordelia froze in mid-step, then began to age rapidly. Her skin wrinkled, her back hunched, her hair whitened and fell out in clumps. "Stop it," Hannah screamed, lunging forward. Her hand struck the pocket watch, knocking it from Elijah's grasp. The moment her skin contacted the metal, a shockwave rippled through the room. The dancing phantoms dissolved. The music stopped abruptly. Most shocking of all, Hannah's hand began to glow with a blue luminescence that spread up her arm, temporarily suppressing the keyhole mark. Elijah staggered backward. Impossible. The bloodline shouldn't be able to resist. Hannah felt a surge of power unlike anything she'd experienced. Knowledge flooded her mind, images of keys, doorways, mechanisms beyond human comprehension. She understood suddenly that her blood carried not just Ambrose's temporal signature, but Emma's resistance to it. "The anchors," she gasped. "I can sense them." Ed smashed the glass case with a nearby chair and grabbed the partial key inside. The moment he touched it, the blue glow from Hannah's arm intensified. "We need to go," Lorraine urged, supporting the now dirty Cordelia. Now. They fled the ballroom, Hannah leading the way as if guided by an internal compass. The house shifted around them, hallways extending and contracting, doors appearing and vanishing. Behind them, they heard Elijah's furious roar and the sound of splintering wood. Hannah led them to Vincent's study, now transformed. The empty key displays glowed faintly, and the mirror above the fireplace showed not their reflections, but different rooms of the house simultaneously. There, Hannah pointed to a small desk drawer that hadn't been there before. Another anchor. Ed yanked open the drawer to find a silver pocket watch. The moment he removed it, the room temperature plummeted. Their breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. "He's manipulating the house," Cordelia warned, her voice now thin and frail. "Trying to trap us in separate time streams." Lorraine moved to the mirror, placing her hand against its surface. The glass rippled like water. "We can use this. The mirror shows the true nature of the house, all time streams at once." As she spoke, one of the reflected rooms shifted to show Vincent strapped to a table in what appeared to be a basement laboratory. Elijah stood over him, carving symbols into his flesh with a key-shaped blade. With each cut, Vincent's body transformed, slightly, becoming more metallic. "He's turning Vincent into a component," Ed realized in horror. "Not just any component," Cordelia said. "The activation mechanism. Without it, the master key is useless." Hannah approached the mirror, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. When her fingers touched the surface, they sank through. "We can reach him through here. It's too dangerous," Ed cautioned. "If the mirror shifts while you're crossing, you could be trapped between time streams." "We don't have a choice," Hannah insisted. "You said it yourself, we have less than 6 hours until the 13th hour. We need all 7 anchors before then." Lorraine closed her eyes, extending her psychic senses. "She's right. I can feel the time streams converging. The 13th hour is approaching faster than we thought." Before they could decide, the study door burst open. Elijah stood there, but he was changed. His skin had a metallic sheen, and his eyes reflected light like polished brass. When he spoke, his voice echoed as if coming from multiple throats. "Did you think you could hide from me in my own house?" he snarled. "I exist in every room, every time stream." He raised his hand, revealing a key fused to his palm. The metal extended up his arm, merging with his flesh in a grotesque melding of man and metal. "The binding has begun," he said, looking at Hannah. "Soon you'll join with the key, just as I have. Just as Vincent is." He turned the fused key in the air. The effect was instantaneous. All the doors in the room slammed shut, their keyholes glowing with an unnatural light. The walls began to bleed, a thick black substance that moved against gravity, flowing upward to the ceiling. "Lorraine, the mirror," Ed shouted. Lorraine grabbed Hannah's hand and pressed it firmly against the mirror's surface. "Focus on Vincent. See him in your mind." Hannah concentrated, visualizing the basement laboratory. The mirror's surface liquefied around her arm, pulling her forward. She felt a sickening sensation of falling through cold space, then landed hard on a concrete floor. The basement laboratory materialized around her. Vincent lay on the table just as they'd seen in the mirror, his body partially transformed. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Hannah," he gasped, "you shouldn't be here." She moved quickly to his side, working to unfasten the straps binding him. His skin felt wrong beneath her fingers, too hard and cool, like living metal. "I'm getting you out of here," she said. "Too late for me," Vincent whispered. His chest had been cut open, revealing clockwork mechanisms where organs should be. "But not for you. Take this." From within his open chest cavity, he removed a small, golden pocket watch. The third anchor. "Ambrose doesn't know I hid it inside myself." Hannah took the watch, feeling it pulse with energy. The blue glow on her arm intensified, pushing back the metallic transformation of the keyhole mark. "How do I get back?" she asked, looking around the windowless room. "You don't," came Elijah's voice from the doorway. "You've walked willingly into my workshop, little key." Hannah spun to face him, clutching the pocket watch. The Elijah in the doorway looked more human than the one upstairs, his transformation less advanced. She realized with horror that she had traveled to an earlier point in time. "You don't know me yet," she said, understanding dawning. "This is before I arrived at the house." Elijah tilted his head curiously. How interesting, a temporal paradox. Walking on two legs, he approached slowly. "No matter if you're here early, it simply means we can begin the binding sooner." Vincent suddenly convulsed on the table, his body arching impossibly. "Run!" he screamed to Hannah. "The furnace. It's a doorway." Hannah bolted across the laboratory toward an ancient coal furnace built into the wall. Behind her, she heard Elijah's footsteps and felt the air distort as he used his key to warp space around them. She reached the furnace and yanked open its iron door. Instead of fire, she saw the study where the Warrens waited. Without hesitation, she dove through, clutching the third anchor to her chest as reality twisted around her. Hannah tumbled through the furnace doorway, crashing into Ed, who caught her before she hit the floor. The pocket watch, clutched in her hand, pulsed with golden light, synchronizing with the other two anchors. 3 down, 4 to go, she gasped, struggling to her feet. The study had changed again. The walls now featured hundreds of photographs spanning different eras, all showing the same people in slightly different poses. Hannah recognized herself in many of them, sometimes with the Warrens, sometimes alone. In some, she appeared partially transformed, her body merging with metallic key components. "Time variance," Lorraine explained, noticing Hannah's shocked expression. "Each photo shows a different possible outcome." "We need to keep moving," Ed urged. "The mirror is becoming unstable." Indeed, the mirror's surface rippled violently, images of different rooms flashing across it too quickly to follow. In one brief moment, Hannah glimpsed Elijah standing before a massive door inscribed with symbols that hurt her eyes to look at. Cordelia, now aged to extreme frailty, pointed a trembling finger at the ceiling. The attic. Emma hid something there. They helped Cordelia up the narrow stairs to the attic, a cavernous space filled with furniture from different periods stacked haphazardly. Dust motes danced in shafts of light from small dormer windows. "I feel it," Hannah said, the blue glow on her arm pulsing. She followed the sensation to an antique cradle carved with protective symbols. Inside lay another pocket watch, this one made of rose gold. As she reached for it, a haunting lullaby began to play from nowhere and everywhere. The cradle rocked by itself, slowly at first, then with increasing violence. "Take it quick," Ed warned. The moment Hannah's fingers touched the fourth anchor, The cradle exploded into splinters. The lullaby became a woman's scream, echoing through the attic before abruptly silencing. "Emma," Cordelia whispered. That was Emma's cradle, where she hid her child from Ambrose. Hannah clutched the watch, feeling a strange connection to it. My ancestor. The blue glow had now spread to cover her entire arm, temporarily halting the keyhole mark's progression. When she held the 4 anchors together, they resonated with a harmonious tone. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut. Outside, they heard Elijah's voice, chanting in a language none of them recognized. The temperature plummeted, frost forming on the windows. "He's trying to freeze this time stream," Lorraine said. "Trap us here while he completes the ritual." Ed moved to a dormer window, wiping frost from the glass to look outside. What he saw made him step back in shock. The grounds are gone. There's nothing out there but darkness. Hannah joined him at the window. Where the plantation grounds should have been was an endless void filled with floating fragments of other places, other houses, other times, drifting in a black sea. "We're becoming untethered from reality," Lorraine realized. "The 13th hour is approaching faster than we thought." Hannah felt a sharp pain in her unmarked arm. Looking down, she watched in horror as her skin began to transform, becoming metallic from her fingertips upward. "It's starting, the binding." Cordelia collapsed into a chair, her ancient face serene despite their dire situation. 3 anchors remain. 1 in the basement where Hannah just returned from, 1 in the family crypt, and 1 she hesitated, 1 that only reveals itself at the moment of greatest need. Ed checked his equipment, frowning at readings that made no sense. Time is accelerating around us. What was 6 hours away is now maybe 2. A thunderous crash shook the house. Through the frost-covered windows, they saw an impossible sight. The void outside was being filled with an enormous mechanical structure. Massive gears interlocked with clockwork precision, forming the outline of a colossal key. The master key. "Manifesting," Lorraine whispered. "It's becoming physical." Cordelia's breath came in ragged gasps. She clutched Hannah's hand with surprising strength. "Listen carefully. When Ambrose completes the key, he needs a vessel strong enough to channel its power. A descendant of his bloodline, who also carries the Warren sensitivity." Warren's sensitivity. Hannah looked at Lorraine in confusion. Ed's face paled with understanding. "Your mother's maiden name, Warren," Hannah confirmed. "But that's impossible." "Not impossible," Lorraine said softly. "Predestined. You're descended from both bloodlines. Ambrose and Emma on your father's side, and the Warrens through your mother. That's why the house called to you," Cordelia wheezed. "Why your temporal signature is perfect for the key." Hannah felt dizzy with revelation. "So I'm related to all of you. This was always going to happen. Time isn't linear here," Cordelia reminded her. "The future affects the past as much as the past affects the future." Another crash rocked the house. Plaster rained from the ceiling. Through the gaps, they could see not attic space, but other rooms of the house layered impossibly above them. "The house is collapsing in on itself," Ed warned. Time streams merging. Cordelia's breathing became more labored. "There's something I must tell you," before she never finished the sentence. Her body suddenly aged decades more, skin shriveling against bone until she resembled a mummy. Then, most horrifying of all, her remains began to reverse their decay, becoming younger until only a child's body remained, then an infant, then nothing at all. "Her time was stolen completely," Lorraine whispered, "erased from existence." Where Cordelia had sat remained only the 5th pocket watch, made of platinum and diamond. Hannah picked it up with trembling fingers. She was the fifth anchor all along. The moment the 5 anchors came together, the blue glow enveloped Hannah completely. Knowledge flooded her mind, generations of secrets compressed into a single moment of understanding. "I know where the 6th anchor is," she said, her voice resonating strangely, "and I know what I have to do." The attic door burst open on its own, revealing not the hallway they had used to enter, but a stone staircase spiraling downward. "The family crypt," Hannah said with certainty. "The 6th anchor is there. We can't just walk into his trap," Ed cautioned. "It's not his trap," Hannah replied, her voice still carrying that strange resonance. "It's Emma's. She created these pathways between time streams, knowing someday they would be needed." The blue glow surrounding Hannah illuminated their way as they descended the spiral staircase. The air grew colder with each step, their breath fogging before them. The stone walls were carved with symbols similar to those Hannah had seen around the keyhole mark on her arm. "Protection sigils," Lorraine observed, "designed to hide something from Ambrose." They emerged into a circular chamber lined with stone sarcophagi. In the center stood a plain pedestal supporting a wooden box. "That's it," Hannah said, approaching slowly. The moment she touched the box, all the sarcophagi lids slid open simultaneously. The group tensed, expecting the worst, but the coffins were empty save for personal effects, keys, watches, jewelry, and small mementos. Temporal anchors, Lorraine realized. Each Devereaux who resisted Ambrose left behind an object. Hannah opened the box to reveal the 6th pocket watch, this one made of copper with emerald inlays. As she lifted it, the blue glow around her intensified, pushing back the metallic transformation that had begun on her other arm. "We need the 7th anchor," Ed said, checking his watch. "Less than an hour until the 13th hour." Hannah closed her eyes, concentrating on the knowledge flowing through her. "The 7th anchor isn't a watch, it's a key. The original key that Emma used to escape Ambrose. Where is it?" Lorraine asked. "I don't know yet." Hannah gathered the 6 anchors together. "But these will help protect us while we search." Using string from Ed's equipment bag, Hannah fashioned a simple necklace, threading the watches together. When she placed it around her neck, the glow stabilized, forming a shield of blue light around all 3 of them. "This will temporarily shield us from Elijah's awareness," she explained, and slowed the binding process. Ed took Lorraine's hand. "We need to prepare spiritually as well. If what we're facing exists outside conventional reality, our standard approaches may not work." Lorraine nodded gravely. "This isn't just a haunting or demonic presence. These entities exist beyond our understanding of good and evil. They consume time itself." From his case, Ed removed a worn Bible, a vial of holy water, blessed candles, and several religious medallions. "We each take one," he instructed, handing medallions to Hannah and Lorraine. "Will these even work against something like this?" Hannah asked, studying the St. Benedict medal in her palm. "Faith transcends time," Lorraine said simply. "Belief is its own power." They formed a circle as Ed read passages from the Bible, focusing on verses about eternity and divine timelessness. Lorraine guided them through prayers of protection, her voice growing stronger with each word. As they prayed, the blue shield around them brightened, reinforced by their spiritual focus. Hannah felt the keyhole mark on her arm recede slightly, the metallic transformation reversing. "It's working," she whispered. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling as a thunderous boom echoed through the crypt. "He's breaching the time stream barriers," Lorraine warned. "The anchors only buy us time. They don't stop him completely." Hannah concentrated, accessing the knowledge flowing through her blood. "I can see it now. The seventh anchor. It's not hidden in the house at all. It's hidden in time itself, at the exact moment the 13th hour begins." A temporal paradox, Ed realized. The anchor exists only when we need it most, which creates the conditions for its existence in the first place. Another tremor shook. The crypt, stronger this time. One of the sarcophagi cracked down the middle. "We need to get to the heart of the house," Hannah said. "The place where all time streams converge." "Vincent's study," Lorraine suggested. "No," Hannah shook her head. "Deeper, the foundation, where the house first began." They left the crypt, following Hannah's intuition through corridors that shifted and changed around them. The protection of the anchors held, creating a bubble of stable reality amidst the temporal chaos. They descended through layers of the house that shouldn't have existed, multiple basements, each from a different era of the mansion's existence. The architecture grew more primitive as they went deeper, until they reached a dirt-floored cellar with rough stone walls. "The original root cellar," Hannah said, "from when the plantation was first built." In the center of the room stood a simple wooden table. Atop it lay a human skeleton, its bones partially fused with metal components in the shape of a key. "The first victim," Lorraine whispered, her psychic senses overwhelmed by the lingering pain. "Ambrose's wife," Hannah corrected. "His first attempt at forging a living key, before he realized he needed specific bloodlines." Ed examined the gruesome remains. "These metal components, they're similar to what we saw happening to Vincent." Hannah nodded. "The process has been perfected over centuries of trials. Countless victims." Lorraine closed her eyes, extending her psychic awareness. "I can feel them all. The people who died here, their time stolen, their bodies transformed." As if in response to her words, the skeleton's jaw moved, teeth clacking together 3 times before falling still again. "We need to prepare the room," Hannah said, suddenly certain. "The 13th hour will manifest here first. It's where time streams are thinnest." Working quickly, they used Ed's chalk to draw protective circles on the floor. Lorraine placed blessed candles at cardinal points, while Hannah arranged the 6 anchors in a ring around the table. "When the hour comes," Hannah explained, "all possible timelines will converge here. Past, present, future, all happening simultaneously. That's our only chance to find the 7th anchor and stop Ambrose." Ed checked his watch again. 10 minutes. Above them, they heard the house groaning as reality strained against itself. Footsteps echoed from multiple directions at once. Elijah was coming from every time stream at once. Hannah took a deep breath, the blue glow around her pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "Get ready, time is about to break." The candles flickered in a non-existent breeze, their flames stretching unnaturally toward the ceiling. Ed's watch began running backward, then forward at impossible speed, the hands spinning wildly before stopping precisely at 3:15. The dirt floor beneath them rippled like water. The skeleton on the table rattled, its jaw opening in a silent scream. As the 13th hour began, reality fractured around them. The root cellar remained, but now layered with every version of itself across time. Hannah saw the room as it had been centuries ago during its construction, workers in period clothing passing through her like ghosts. She saw it transformed into a laboratory where Ambrose performed his first experiments. victims strapped to the same table that now held only bones. She saw future versions where the house had crumbled to dust, yet the room somehow remained, preserved in a bubble of stopped time. "Stay inside the circle," Ed warned, his voice echoing strangely. "Those are echoes, not solid realities." The air split open above the table. A vertical tear in space through which Hannah glimpsed something vast and incomprehensible, beings of pure light and darkness intertwined, feeding on the stream of time that flowed from our world into theirs. "The chronophages," Lorraine whispered, her face pale with terror. "The time eaters." Hannah felt a pull from the tear, not physical but temporal. The creatures were drawing on her life force, trying to extract her time as Ambrose had done to So many victims. Multiple versions of Elijah suddenly appeared around them, each from a different point in his centuries-long existence. Some appeared fully human, others partially transformed with key components fused to their flesh. The most terrifying was the most recent version, barely recognizable as human. His body a grotesque fusion of flesh and clockwork, eyes replaced with tiny clock faces. "The anchors won't hold against all of us." The Elijahs spoke in unison, their voices overlapping in a discordant chorus. "The key will be completed. It has already been completed. Will always be completed." The oldest Elijah, most fully transformed, approached the edge of their protective circle. Where he stepped, reality warped around him. "You've brought exactly what I need to this exact moment," he said, looking at Hannah. "The perfect vessel, carrying both bloodlines with all 6 anchors. You've completed my work for me." "The 7th anchor," Hannah whispered to Ed and Lorraine. "I still can't see it." Lorraine squeezed her hand. "Focus, look deeper into the time streams." Hannah concentrated, letting the knowledge from the anchors flow through her. The blue shield around them pulsed, pushing back against the Elijah's attempts to breach it. Through the tier above the table, something reached toward them, a limb made of pure temporal energy, constantly shifting between states of existence. As it penetrated our reality, clocks throughout the house shattered. The anchors around Hannah's neck vibrated violently. "I see it now," she gasped. "The 7th anchor. It's not an object at all." Understanding dawned on Lorraine's face. "It's a person." Hannah nodded. "Vincent." He transformed himself into the final anchor, hiding within his own body. That's why Ambrose needed him. The oldest Elijah snarled with rage. "Impossible. Vincent is already part of the master key." "No," Hannah countered. "You only took part of him, the physical form, his consciousness, his temporal essence. He hid that somewhere else." She closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind across the fractured time streams. "I can feel him." He scattered himself, pieces hidden throughout time. The Elijahs began to chant in unison, using the language of the chronophages. The protective circle weakened, blue light flickering as darkness seeped through. "Whatever you're going to do it now," Ed urged, holding the circle with sheer force of will and faith. Hannah removed the necklace of anchors, holding them in her cupped hands. Vincent knew this moment would come. He prepared for it across centuries. She focused her entire being on the anchors, letting their energy flow into her. The blue glow intensified until it was painful to look at her directly. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of generations. "Vincent Devereaux, I call you. From across time, gather yourself, become whole." The skeleton on the table began to transform, flesh reappearing on bone, organs reforming, skin growing to cover muscle. Within seconds, Vincent lay before them, alive but changed his body, a perfect fusion of human and mechanism. a living anchor. He sat up, eyes opening to reveal clockwork irises that spun and clicked as he focused. "Hannah," he said, his voice resonating with the same quality as hers. "You found all the pieces." The Elijahs howled with rage, throwing themselves against the weakening barrier. Cracks appeared in the blue shield as the oldest, Elijah, began to merge with his other selves, becoming a singular entity of immense power. "The master key is nearly complete," Vincent warned, getting to his feet unsteadily. "We have moments only." Through the tear above them, the chronophage limb extended further, reaching for Hannah. The metallic transformation on her arm accelerated, spreading across her chest toward her heart. "What do we do?" she cried, fighting against the painful transformation. Vincent placed his mechanical hand over her heart. "You must become what Emma became, the lock rather than the key." "I don't understand." "Ambrose created a key to open doorways between worlds," Vincent explained. "Emma created its opposite, a living lock, to seal them permanently. The anchors were never meant to stop the key. They were meant to forge the lock." The room shuddered as Elijah, now a singular entity of tremendous power, broke through the protective circle. He grabbed Ed, throwing him against the wall with inhuman strength. "Give me the anchors," he demanded, advancing on Hannah. "Give me what is mine by right." Lorraine placed herself between them, holding up her crucifix. "Your right ended centuries ago, Ambrose. You've stolen enough time." Vincent pressed the 6 anchors into Hannah's hands, closing her fingers around them. "You know what to do. You've always known." And suddenly, she did. Standing at the convergence of all time streams, with Vincent as the 7th anchor beside her, Hannah understood her purpose with perfect clarity. Not a key to open doorways, a lock to close them forever. Hannah raised the 6 anchors above her head. The pocket watches began to melt, flowing together into a liquid metal that coated her arms without burning. The blue protective glow intensified, expanding outward to create a dome of light around her, Vincent, and the Warrens. "No!" Elijah roared, lunging toward her. Vincent intercepted him, his mechanized body moving with impossible speed. "You will not touch her, Father." Elijah recoiled in shock. "You dare call me that? You, who betrayed our family legacy." "I am trying to save what remains of our family," Vincent countered. "This ends now." The tear in reality widened above them as the chronophage limb pushed further into our world. The basement shuddered, dirt raining from the ceiling as timelines collapsed around them. Hannah felt the liquid metal of the anchors seeping into her skin, flowing through her veins toward her heart. Knowledge from centuries of Devereaux resistance flooded her mind. Emma's original escape, her descendants' efforts to hide the anchor components, Vincent's centuries-long plan to create a living lock. "She cannot become the lock," Elijah snarled. "Her bloodline makes her the key. It is her destiny." "You manipulated our bloodline," Vincent replied, "but you never understood it. Emma changed something when she escaped you. She altered our very essence." Hannah closed her eyes, focusing on the metal flowing through her. The keyhole mark on her arm began to transform, its shape inverting from a keyhole to a key. Lorraine helped Ed to his feet, both of them joining hands to strengthen the protective dome around them. "Whatever you're doing, Hannah, do it quickly," Lorraine urged. "Reality is collapsing." Through the widening tear, Hannah glimpsed the true form of the chronophyse's massive crystalline entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, feeding on the temporal energy that flowed between realities. They sensed what was happening and pushed harder against the barrier between worlds. Elijah's body began to transform further, becoming more machine than man, as he drew on the chronophage's power. "I have waited centuries for this moment," he growled, his voice no longer human. "The door will open." "Not this time," Hannah said, her voice resonating with the power of the anchors. The liquid metal reached her heart, completing its journey through her body. Hannah gasped as knowledge became power, theoretical understanding transformed into practical ability. She raised her transformed arms, the right marked with a key symbol, the left with a lock. "I am the descendant of both key and lock," she declared. "I choose which future comes to pass." She turned toward the tear in reality, facing the chronophage. Directly, "You will not enter this world. Not now, not ever." Hannah pressed her palms together, key to lock, completing a circuit of temporal energy. The blue dome expanded explosively, filling the entire basement. Where it touched the walls, time stabilized, reality solidifying. Elijah screamed as the blue energy engulfed him, stripping away his stolen time. Before their eyes, he began to age rapidly, centuries of borrowed time returning to their rightful owners. "What have you done?" he gasped, his mechanical components falling away as his body reverted to human form. "I'm returning what was stolen," Hannah answered, "including my own destiny." Vincent placed his hand on Hannah's shoulder, adding his power to hers. Together, we closed the circle. The seventh anchor activated, Vincent's mechanized body glowing with the same blue light. He began to transform, becoming pure temporal energy that flowed into Hannah, completing the lock mechanism. Lorraine gasped as visions overwhelmed her, Vincent's centuries-long plan becoming clear. He knew, she whispered to Ed. Vincent always knew Hannah would come, would choose to become the lock instead of the key. The chronophage limb recoiled from the expanding blue energy, pulling back toward the tier as Hannah advanced. With each step she took, reality stabilized around her time streams that had been fractured, healing like wounds sealing closed. "You have no power in this world," Hannah told the entities beyond the tier. "Your servant is defeated. Your doorway is closing." She raised her hands toward the tier, key and lock marks glowing blindingly bright. The tier began to shrink, reality knitting itself back together as Hannah imposed order on chaos. Elijah, now reduced to a frail old man, crawled toward her in desperation. "Please," he begged, "my immortality. I cannot die now." "Your time ended centuries ago, Ambrose," Hannah said without malice. "Accept what comes to us all." As the tears shrank to a pinpoint, the chronophages made a final, desperate attempt to break through. A pulse of energy shot from the closing tier, striking Hannah directly in the chest. She staggered, but remained standing, absorbing the attack and transmuting it. "The lock is forged," she declared, the key destroyed. With a sound like a massive door slamming shut, the tier vanished completely. The blue energy contracted, drawing back into Hannah before fading entirely. Silence fell in the basement. Elijah collapsed to the dirt floor, his body rapidly decaying into dust that scattered across centuries of accumulated time. Where he had stood remained only a simple iron key, blackened as if burned. Hannah fell to her knees, exhausted. The marks on her arms had vanished, but a new mark had appeared over her heart, a symbol that was neither key nor lock, but something in between. "Is it over?" Ed asked, helping her to her feet. "The doorway is sealed," Hannah confirmed. "The chronophages cannot reach our world again." Lorraine approached the spot where Vincent had been. he sacrificed himself. Hannah shook her head. Not sacrificed, transformed. Vincent became part of the lock mechanism. He exists now as a guardian at the threshold, ensuring the door remains closed. The basement around them began to shift, but this time not in the chaotic way it had before. The multiple time streams were settling, finding their proper places in sequence. The house is stabilizing, Ed observed. Returning to normal space-time, Hannah looked around, feeling both the weight and liberation of what had just occurred. Normal is relative when you've seen what exists beyond the doors. Lorraine took her hand gently. Come, it's time to leave this place. Together, they ascended from the basement, leaving behind the dust of centuries and the remnants of keys that would never again unlock the doors to hell. 3 months after the events at Devereaux Plantation, Hannah sat on the porch of the Warrens. Connecticut home. The mark over her heart had faded to a faint silver outline, visible only in certain light. The plantation house had collapsed completely the morning after they sealed the tier, imploding into a sinkhole that swallowed all evidence of what had occurred there. Local authorities attributed it to structural failure, never suspecting the temporal cataclysm that had nearly destroyed reality. Ed emerged from the house with tea. How are you feeling today? Better. The dreams are less frequent now. After leaving Louisiana, Hannah had experienced nightmares of time fracturing around her. Lorraine helped her understand these weren't simply dreams but after effects of her connection to the lock mechanism. We found something interesting in our research. Ed mentioned Emma Devereaux's descendants through the generations. Your family tree, what about it? There's a pattern of temporal anomalies following your bloodline, and frequent connections to the Warren family, though distant. So I really am related to you both. Distantly, Ed confirmed. Lorraine believes Emma was guided by forces working against the chronophages, forces that have been guiding both our families for generations. Before Hannah could respond, Lorraine appeared in the doorway, her expression troubled. Ed, it's happening again. They followed her to the study where a map showed several pins around New Orleans, pulsing with faint blue light. The same energy signature as the lock mechanism, Lorraine explained. When Hannah touched one, a vision flashed through her mind. A different plantation house with the same terrible doorways. They're connected, she realized. Places where the barrier between worlds is naturally weak. Ambrose wasn't working alone, Ed concluded. The Keepers of the Gate, a secret society dedicated to opening doorways for the chronophages. That night, Hannah dreamed of Vincent. He stood in a misty liminal space, his form shifting between human and mechanism. You felt the other doorways, he said. Yes, we're going to close them. Close one, and another appears. It's the nature of reality. Then we keep working, Hannah replied. I remain at the threshold, guarding what cannot be allowed to pass. You are the lock in the world of the living. Hannah woke with the dawn to find a pocket watch on her windowsill that hadn't been there before. When she opened it, the hands moved backward. Downstairs, she found Ed and Lorraine preparing for their journey. I had a visitor last night, Hannah said, showing them the watch. Vincent? Lorraine asked. Hannah nodded. I think he can still reach through, just enough to guide us. Then we follow that guidance, Ed decided. The Warren legacy continues with a new chapter. Hannah placed the watch in her pocket, feeling it synchronize with the lock mechanism in her heart. Some doors were meant to stay locked, and she had become the key that turned in the opposite direction, sealing rather than opening. Forever the guardian of hell's doorways.